Hi everyone, thanks for joining us today.
It does sound sophisticated.
Sophisticated, yeah.
With the ACE community for 3 years now.
Actually outlined everything.
Something that we find in the society.
First, talk about the problems that you're trying to solve.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining us today for another episode of Deep Random Talks. Today we have our familiar face, Suhas, familiar guest. You've seen him on the show before, as well as my awesome co-host Serena, and we're going to talk about a topic that you're waiting to hear more from, as if you haven't heard enough about it. But hopefully we will provide a summary of perspectives and some interesting questions about ChatGPT, what it is and what it is not. So thanks for being with us, Suhas and Serena. So what's new with you, Serena?
So I have been doing my yearly planning for 2023, and Suhas knows all about this because I actually shared my plan with him the other day. I'm going to try to be very ambitious with growing my social media. I want to get to 50K Instagram followers, 100K on TikTok, and also grow my mailing list and grow my food shake user base as well. So 2023 is going to be an exciting year. Hopefully I'm able to reach my goals.
Beautiful. Those are ambitious, but I'm sure you can do it. How about you, Suhas? What's new with you?
I'm looking forward to the vacation sprint. Usually when it is vacation for everyone, I like to work and take a vacation instead in January. So I'm looking forward to working without much distractions.
Beautiful. So I know you've been on the show a few times, but we never have done a little, get to know Suhas better kind of sprint. So let's do that now. So you are Suhas Pai. You are originally from India, is that right?
Yes.
But you lived in...
I lived in Europe for close to a decade. Okay. And I moved to Canada around 3 to 4 years ago. Yeah.
Okay. And do you call Canada home or
yeah, Canada is definitely my home, without doubt. Yeah. Beautiful.
So I'm going to ask you a few rapid fire questions. So what does Suhas Pai do?
I'm a CTO and co-founder at a fintech AI company based in Toronto. It's called Bedrock AI. We have been at it for over 3 years now. And I work in machine learning and natural language processing. I lead ML efforts for our team, especially in the areas of text ranking and semantic parsing, knowledge-based construction, and so on. Yeah.
Beautiful. Are you working on any interesting side projects these days?
Yeah, I've been working on quite a few side projects. I was co-chair of the Big Science Privacy Working Group, where we worked on efforts to, make our pre-training data more respectful of people's privacy needs, and also I've been working on several politics-related NLP projects, and more recently started looking at ways that I can contribute towards a open source ChatGPT type system. So that would be interesting.
We're going to talk more about that. Mm-hmm. Now more personal questions. What is Suhas Pai's favorite food or drink?
So with respect to food, I love innovation. So I love diversity and innovation. So this means that I try my very best to never eat the same dish twice.
Lifetime? Or you mean in a day?
In my lifetime. I mean, it's hard to do that, but I'm in the best city that it's possible to do so. Because here in Toronto, you have over 100 cuisines represented. It's just a matter of finding them. And yeah, so if I go to a restaurant, I never try the same dish twice, even if I liked it really. I liked it a lot when I first tried it. I won't try it again because I'm always greedy to know what other things I haven't tried.
So your favorite food is variety then? I know this app that you can use to turn your food into other types of food.
I think it's called Food Shake. Yeah, I've heard of it.
So it has this feature that says "Surprise me," and you just click on it. Does it?
Yeah.
That's a new feature.
The feature has not yet been built, but there's a lot of user feedback apparently.
Oh,
for that feature.
Okay,
that's great.
Cool. So you don't necessarily have a favorite. You like to jump around, but do you have something that you absolutely dislike?
Any liquids of any sort except water. I just drink water for my sustenance, but otherwise I detest all liquids. I have a deep aversion towards them.
Okay, sounds good. So let's jump into the topic. What's the most interesting thing each of you have heard about ChatGPT?
My most interesting thing, of course, it's selfish as always. I'm very interested in how ChatGPT could convert recipes into their plant-based version. So I saw this on social media. Someone I'm connected with said, hey, make a plant-based dish with all these ingredients I have in my fridge. ChatGPT came up with something interesting. And then I've also used it to say, hey, make the vegan version of spaghetti bolognese or whatever. And even trying to sort of trick it and give it more difficult conversions, it's still quite good. So I think that's pretty cool. And I'm thinking about maybe how I could potentially leverage this kind of technology and algorithm for my own purposes down the line.
I'm a self-confessed ChatGPT addict. I have been using it for a minimum of 3 hours every day, I think, or something like that. And especially the first week it came out, I think I spent 3 sleepless nights. So for me, I think I have been trying to figure out what it is really good at and what it is bad at, looking at all the failure modes and trying to figure out what would be the use cases, how to make it useful to solve real world tasks, which is not really obvious because there are so many failure modes, so you have to isolate them.
Yeah, and I think to level set a bit, at least for myself, so thinking about what ChatGPT or even the GPT models are, so we can go back to Transformers, right? Transformers came out in 2017 with the paper attention is all you need, and that was a encoder decoder architecture. And then later on, BERT was published, so that's the encoder side, and GPT as a class of models is the decoder side. And Suhas, I think when GPT or ChatGPT came out, you actually texted me saying that you had a religious experience and you stayed up all night playing with ChatGPT, playing with this decoder-based model. So what really convinced you to take it more seriously, and why was it such a religious experience for you?
I'm usually not like this. I was a language model skeptic for far longer than most people were. I started using BERT right as it came out, but I was still, and I'm still not convinced that this is going to lead us to AGI or whatever. I still cringe when someone or scoff when someone uses the term AGI, and yeah. So I'm usually the more skeptical type, but there have been a couple of times where I've had these so-called what I would call as religious experiences, and I would characterize them as these experiences which fill me with wonderment and joy because I don't know what is behind it. I don't know the internal workings of it. They had 2 such experiences. So one was when I worked with the first instruction fine-tuned model. That was maybe sometime in 2021, and I saw how effective it was, and that totally, made me a whole lot more optimistic about the world of language models, because now you don't really need to rely on 175 billion parameter models to do something really useful. But with ChatGPT, I think it was more the way that you could interact freely with the system. And this was very similar to Google search when it first came out, or when I first started using it. I remember I think I was a teenager, and I first got to know what Google was. I literally spent the 3 sleepless nights. Actually, it was days at that time because I didn't have a computer at home, so I had to go to a cyber cafe.
So to I guess set the scene, let's take a step back. I guess everybody has heard about what ChatGPT is and what it can do, but let's break down the technical journey that we have taken from, as Serena said, BERT in 2017 to where we are in 2022. In a short 5 years, things have drastically changed. Starting with transformers, making a huge difference in natural language processing at the beginning, and then in other areas like vision as well. So let's take a step back in the history, because one of the things that you said that was very interesting, and sort of a familiar point, was also that a lot of people who are very drastically impressed by ChatGPT and think that it just came out of nowhere have not been paying attention to what was happening between 2020. I believe that's where was that where GPT-3 came out, and now where the ChatGPT, which is a modification of that. So there has been a lot of changes happening between these 2 years. But even taking a step back, so for those who are less familiar, GPT models are these category of generative pre-trained models. So essentially models that are trained on a large corpus of documents, normally trained on predicting the next token, but then they can generalize to do many different types of tasks. Like essentially they are trained on generation, but then they can do multitasking. And at the beginning, I guess the ambition was to do zero-shot multitasking, but then we learned that we probably need to do few-shot multitasking, and the whole topic of prompt engineering came out. So tell us a little about that history, and then from 2020 until now, what has been happening in the GPT-3 area specifically.
So the first revolution was, I guess, in 2018, when transfer learning started becoming more and more mainstream. So where you had this paradigm where there's someone pre-trains a model on a large body of text, and that imbibes the model with language capabilities, low-level language, general-purpose language capabilities. And then you could take a data set of your own and fine-tune that model for your specific task. And that paradigm worked. It was a radical departure from the past. So now you had task-agnostic architectures. You can use the same model, and then you can just fine-tune it for different tasks and create copies of it. So it worked really well, but it had its downsides. The downsides were the fine-tuning annotation cost, especially if you are doing very domain-specific annotation. The annotation cost per example can run into several dollars. Like, for example, for my company, we need a CPA or someone with that level of experience to do an annotation, and it gets very expensive. So people wanted to reduce that and basically make it more sample efficient. And one other thing that people also were noticing is that the model size or the capacity also was playing a part. So the larger the model, even though if you have the same architecture and everything else remains the same, but you only increase the number of layers, the number of parameters, you are starting to see better performance. So there was this power law, scaling law that we were starting to see. So that was when OpenAI came up with GPT-3, which they scaled it up all the way up to 175 billion parameters. And then they noticed that there were emergent properties that were starting to come once you cross a particular parameter count. Emergent properties are those properties which they don't have this kind of a linear scaling. So that means that you don't see this behavior at all in lower capacity models. They suddenly appear. But however, when GPT-3 first came, people were fascinated by it. It was able to beat a few benchmarks, but ultimately it was not very useful. One reason was that it was still trained on the training objective was still train the next token in the sequence, and you can do a whole lot of things just by learning to predict that. and you have 175 billion parameters to enable you to learn a whole lot. The expressivity is pretty huge. So there's still a lot of things you could do, but it was not, it was like a teenager that doesn't want to listen to you.
So when GPT-3 came out, I remember there was a decent amount of hype around it, and I think we even covered it in an ACE session back when we met in person and would have these paper review sessions, and we sort of had that session, and then after that it dropped off my radar, whereas with ChatGPT, I think there's really been that momentum. People have been talking about it and people haven't stopped talking about it, so there's something much more exciting about ChatGPT over GPT-3. But what were people really in the end able to do with GPT-3? I think there's been several companies who have started around the marketing copy space using GPT-3.
I think I saw a very interesting social media post earlier today that was like, in the priority of things that we wanted to automate with AI, creativity was at the bottom of that list. Like we were like, oh yeah, eventually. But, in hindsight, things like, GPT-3, Stable Diffusion more recently, and ChatGPT are showing that they can be very handy tools in the context of creativity. And I think, as you were saying, part of it is the fact that for creativity, you need to go outside of the known bounds. While for other types of, natural language tasks or even formal language tasks, there are very clear boundaries around what the text that is generated, what is the text that is extracted can be. And part of the way that we solved this problem was using prompt engineering. And I remember, people even talking about being a prompt engineer in a sense that they would sit down and tweak all of these prompts to these large language models to get exactly what they wanted. Maybe tell us a little about that. Like, how were people thinking about tackling this problem early on, and how did that evolve over time?
Yeah. So this all goes back to the next token prediction problem. So you are trying to, if you are trying to generate text, you want the next token, given a particular context, you want the next token to be something that would have a relatively high probability, because you usually don't always pick the token with the highest probability, something with the pretty high probability of getting generated. And then you had to think backwards and imagine what words should my prompt or my context have such that these would be the kind of tokens that would be generated. And that's how people started manually engineering these prompts. But then there were also automated techniques. So there was even continuous vectors that were included in prompts. It's called prefix tuning. And so it became a whole field in its own right. It was not something that could be generalized. So it's not like you can publish a list of prompts and then these prompts could work in every instance, in every case. And
so I assume in a scenario like this where you need to know what to say for the model to say the right things, because it is ultimately doing the generation. I feel that you need to really know the training data pretty well, because if you don't know how a certain question is asked in the training data, no amount of fine-tuning whatever you're saying is going to be helpful. Was that part of the problem as well?
Yeah, definitely. So you didn't know what were the data sets that were used. But for example, if you knew them, it would make it better. So for example, if you were trained on Reddit posts, a lot of Reddit posts have TLDR, or too long didn't read. So now you can use the TLDR prompt and it would be better able to summarize, because it has seen this prompt a lot of times during its training and it knows that.
Then what is the solution to this problem? It sounds very unlikely that the end user has a very detailed knowledge of the data set. So where can we go from here?
There was a lot of work being done on this problem, and one of the most promising solutions is instruction fine-tuning. I think that is probably the single biggest advance that I have seen. And so instruction fine-tuning is, so let's say you have this pre-trained model, and the pre-trained model doesn't really know what kind of questions a user will use when it's inference time. But you can have a few data sets where you collect a list of instructions and how the instructions phrased in natural language. So for example, explain like I'm 5 years old, and that is one instruction. Write a explain this algorithm in the style of Bob Dylan is another instruction. So you collect all of these different instructions into, and the answers to those instructions into a data set, and you fine tune the model on it. And now the model now can generalize to instructions that it has not seen before. You can convert any data set that you have into an instruction data set, just generate some templates, and then phrase the input-output examples in those templated ways, where the template is basically how a human would ask a question.
Got it. And do you know if instruction fine-tuning, this was a method that was created for the purposes of GPT-3 fine-tuning, or was it borrowed from some other domain?
There have been several parallel streams of work. I think the word instruction fine-tuning, or the first paper, there were many parallel ones. So there was one from Google Research. They came up with their FLAN model. And I think there was ICLR 2021 or 2022. I'm not sure. So that was one of the first papers. Instruct GPT also used instruction fine-tuning, but they also included reinforcement learning, at least in the paper. They mentioned the reinforcement learning step. And then there was also Big Science, which came up with instruction fine-tuned models. So that was T0++. Yeah.
Right, and the main reason that OpenAI, at least in their public publications, the reason that they started using instruction-based models was, or instruction-based fine-tuning was alignment. So they didn't want the model to say things that a human wouldn't say, or say things that a human with good intentions wouldn't say. So part of what they did was that essentially they had annotators who looked at the outputs, ranked different outputs that GPT-3 would produce, and essentially trained models to learn policies around how a human would rank the results. So, as you said, it wouldn't need, the large army of annotators as, the earlier models would have needed, but still needs annotation and a bit of a supervision, right? So isn't that going to be like a bottleneck in using these type of models going forward?
Yes, so that's a really good point. When GPT-3 came out, so there was an open source replication, but this is a little harder to replicate. One reason is that there was a lot of manual effort involved for annotating or ranking the prompts and the responses to improve ChatGPT-like systems. And not only that, they had a far superior prompt dataset because they had customer API calls from which they can extract prompts. The prompt datasets that we have right now are mostly academic datasets where the prompts were just generated from templates. But humans have such a variety of different needs, and as we have seen, the different ways with which people have interacted with ChatGPT. So generating such a prompt dataset is very, very hard. So there is an effort currently starting from an open source community organization called Lion. Lion is also the same organization that came up with the image dataset that was used to train Stable Diffusion. But I think it would need a lot of open source volunteers getting together in order to get a dataset that is anywhere close to the quality that OpenAI has.
was actually looking at a breakdown of the type of queries, the type of prompts that their system got, and it was quite interesting. Like there are a very wide range of types of questions that people have asked, like help me ideate about this thing or explain this thing to me, blah blah blah. So they definitely are sitting on a very rich data set that probably is a bit of a competitive advantage, because before all we were thinking about was, oh, we're going to use bigger models that requires more computational power, but we can sort of crowdsource that. But really crowdsourcing high quality annotation is going to be an interesting question to see how the open source community will react to it. As you said, we have a very good example like Bloom, where all the annotation was, community sourced, especially in the, alignment space of privacy and all that. But on the technical side, I think there is another topic that we haven't touched on, and there's not a lot of conversation around, which is the training data set includes a broader range of types of text, as well as the embedding model is very different or has evolved over time. So can you talk about those as well?
So there's this code-based model which was trained on both code and language, and that was used as the base for an instruction or the first version of Instruct GPT. And the first version of Instruct GPT, it was called it's not the first one, but the one that was available immediately before say ChatGPT came out all through 2022. It was called DaVinci 002, and that was based on a technique called Feed Me, for which they promised they would have a paper out. And I think this promise was made earlier in the year, but the paper has not come out yet. But the two-line description that they have about the paper is it uses SFT, or supervised fine-tuning, of these prompt response prompts and the user-generated responses from their annotators, basically. And then they also do ranking, where they make the models generate different alternatives to the same prompt, different alternative responses to the same prompt, and then they ask annotators to rank which is the better one, which is the better response, and then they use the ones that are ranked the highest as part of the training data. So that was the Feed Me, and then most recently we came towards reinforcement learning. There hasn't been a change in the architecture per se, or at least a major change in the architecture of the GPT-3 style models. They are still more or less like the original ones. It's just the way it was fine-tuned on to make it more aligned.
So let's see if I have the timeline correct, or sort of the progression of the different, I'm going to say models, but generally this is all ChatGPT, going from GPT-3 to ChatGPT. We have GPT-3, it's a decoder-based architecture. Then early 2022, Instruct GPT comes out, and that Instruct GPT has this instruction-based fine-tuning approach added on. And then partway through 2022, supervised fine-tuning is added in addition. And then in November 2022, reinforcement learning, human in the loop, fine-tuning is released to GPT and incorporated into that model that's available for the public to query. And then ChatGPT is the version that was released most recently. And is ChatGPT just the same model as what was released in November 2022, but released as a chatbot? So the product decision is different?
So releasing this as a chatbot is an interesting product decision, and it's slightly bold, because if I'm dealing with a search system, for example, as a product, it's a slightly more forgiving. Like I can see 5-10 results, and then as long as what I'm looking for is within 10 results, then that's great. But deploying this as a chat as a product decision is interesting because then the user expectation is that every single result is pretty much what I expect it to be. What are some of the concepts? And we saw a very similar product, a very similar model, Galactica, that came out very, very concurrently with ChatGPT, that largely fell flat because it was also sort of set up as a chat system that you just talk to it about scientific topics, and they just rolled it back like that was a Facebook release, and they just immediately rolled it back because it was just pretty much regurgitating a bunch of junk and factually incorrect things. So what do you think is the thinking that has gone into releasing this as a chat application versus any other potential use case that it could have?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think it was really smart of them to release it as a chatbot. One, it just makes it a lot more accessible and reduces the barrier towards usage. So now just about everyone can use it, and it's a very natural mode of communicating with a model. Note that you are not exactly communicating directly with the model. So ChatGPT adds a prompt of its own to whatever you are communicating, and there have been attempts by people to kind of reverse engineer what that actually that prompt that they are adding is. But so there's something going on there. But overall, I would say that any other interface or any other product decision, it would have been harder for them to elicit feedback from users. And so I think it was just really good that they made it so easy for just about everyone to use. Yeah. With regards to Galactica, I think so. The paper released by Galactica was really, really good, and they came up with a lot of novel techniques that I was very impressed by and were communicated really well. But unfortunately, it got overshadowed by the problems the model has. And the problem was that they were a little too lazy, I would feel, when it comes to dealing with bias issues. So they, I think, if I recall correctly, they just masked certain. They just blocked certain words, which is not a really good way to deal with bias issues. So that was one of their strategies, and it just didn't sit right with me or with a lot of people. But ChatGPT, I think they worked very, very hard in making it a model that was not harmful. You can jailbreak it, of course, as people have shown, but I would say, as I said earlier, I speak to it. I interact with it 3 hours a day, and I guess it is less racist than most strangers that I have spoken to on the internet. So while there are still more issues to be addressed, I think they have done a really good job so far.
Yeah, so it sounds like it's on the technical side, and I guess the AI ethics side, OpenAI was much more careful and caring when it came to developing ChatGPT, whereas Facebook, Meta, sort of just they did something that was maybe from an engineering perspective, very impressive, but they fell short when it comes to the AI ethics piece. I also wonder if maybe even just the branding overall, ChatGPT versus Galactica, which one is a normal person going to interact with? Probably ChatGPT, because what the heck is Galactica? So I think that was also very smart of OpenAI, not just the product, sort of the delivery method, but the name.
Yeah, I think so. And I think Galactica was a research demo, or it was a model demo. Both are research demos. Galactica was a model demo. This was a product demo. It was a full-featured product with a lot of product design behind it. And yeah.
Yeah, as I said, I think the fact that ChatGPT was released as a chatbot has been amazing, because I've seen so many people on LinkedIn who I didn't think had anything to do with the field of machine learning or AI in general. They've been just eating this up and loving it. Even some of my family members have been saying, hey, Serena, look what I can do with ChatGPT, which I think is pretty awesome. And a question that a lot of people have had is this the end of Google? And it's funny because I was sort of thinking for a while, I don't think this will be the end of Google. I think we are all as a society so used to Googling different queries. I mean, it's a verb now for all of us, but I may be able to be convinced at some point. And part of what has helped me be more open to the idea of ChatGPT potentially, or a solution like this potentially really replacing Google, is I came across a YC company. I think they're in the winter or maybe the current batch, and their company, I forget what it's called, but it's a chatbot for search. And I'm just thinking the founders must be pretty nervous right now that ChatGPT just came out and potentially wiped out their idea. But at least someone has been thinking about this. YC seems to think it's an interesting enough idea to fund it. Maybe a model like ChatGPT or a product like ChatGPT could kill Google in the end. But to finish my train of thought, I also think what's stopping Google from coming up with a product like this themselves? It's not necessarily going to come from OpenAI.
One thing about Google, they're already ahead of the game, I think. So they have this 540 billion parameter model PaLM. And I think I saw a paper that was updated very recently where people, where those authors took the GPT 3.5 and benchmarked it against PaLM. They were having very similar results. The only reason you don't see PaLM in the news very much is because Google didn't come out with a chatbot. They could have come out with it because they have the model right there. They have a model that is probably just as good as anything that OpenAI has come out, and you can see that in the benchmark results. It performs really, really well. But with respect to Google as a search engine, I think they are not very comparable. I think ChatGPT is a really good NLU NLG interface that can call a search engine, and not just call a search engine, but it could call a Python interpreter. It could call public or private APIs. It's basically something that the thing that I found most useful about ChatGPT is that it gets answers wrong a lot. So that part is, so I won't rely on it for answers, but what I will rely on it for is intent recognition and query understanding. It has never misunderstood me. I try to, I change the order of my words, but that is okay because even BERT is insensitive to word order. I jumbled my the letters inside words, made a lot of typos and everything, and just even from a surface form, it's able to understand my query. But even if I present my query in very cryptic forms of text, it's still it's still pretty good at understanding my query. It's pretty bad at figuring out the answer, because figuring out the answer takes a lot more common sense reasoning and so on than just understanding the question. So what I would see is a GPT-like system here is just offloading. It's deciding how to basically chain all the function calls that it needs to make and then offload wherever you want. Don't make the language model learn to add numbers or linear algebra. Just make it generate the proper queries to a calculator that it can offload to. And even search, just query a search engine, get the citations, come back. And then the ChatGPT, the GPT-3 type of models, they are very good at summarization. So once you get the results from Google, you can summarize it in really good ways. But
yeah, definitely, given the fact that systems like language models are pretty much just generating similar text that they've seen elsewhere, sort of summarizing it maybe, etc., they can't really fact check anything. So we definitely need, a system as complex as Google is in Google searches, in fact checking things and providing proper references to where the information comes from. And as you said, all of the other types of very, very structured information retrieval or different types of computation that exist to essentially collaborate with an interface. Like what I see this more, I think you also alluded to it as an intermediary interface between humans and all of these systems, so that I don't have to know which system to go to ask the question. I can ask it on one interface, and it, on my behalf, will figure out where to find the information and summarize it for me. So definitely from that point of view, I think there will be very interesting business opportunities that will come up, because, you know, OpenAI or any other company that comes up with a similar interface can be sort of the communication layer. But then, you know, all of us founders have to figure out how we want to adapt it to different verticals. And even, you know, you and I, Suhas, talked about these vertical GPTs. Like, you're very excited about workspace GPTs. You know, a lot of people on social media I saw, you know, can I retrain GPT on my whole Confluence and just ask it questions, right? So what are some of the patterns that you think we'll see going forward? And, you know, what are some of the technical challenges in front of those, in your opinion?
There is a lot of opportunity here. And the opportunity is not really just after ChatGPT, but it's the opportunity that you can see from instruction fine-tuning and also reinforcement learning. Although the latter, we are not entirely sure if it is actually needed, because you know, there's still a lot of work to be done there to understand why it's so effective and whether it's actually needed or not. But I tried asking ChatGPT very complex financial and accounting questions, and it failed. And it was not surprising that it failed. But I can see vertical GPTs, like something that is tailored for finance. In fact, we are actually building one at my company right now. And you can also imagine things like workspace GPTs. Like, for example, a large company, they have so many internal documents or processes. They can have everything trained on a GPT-like model, so that it could, form the basis for their knowledge, organization, and management. You can also have personal GPTs, a more powerful Alexa that would take care of everything that's on your phone, and you can just talk to it in natural language. You can have social GPTs that maybe sit embedded inside a group chat and knows everything about each person. So so there's a whole lot of opportunities here. But I think the separating out all the problems that the current GPT 3.5 has, or these models or techniques in general have, and then isolating only those that are good is going to be really hard. Involves a lot of product design too, very creative product design.
What's the verdict? Maybe starting from Serena, what are you thinking about differently now that all of these new evolutions have happened? And Suhas, for you as well, you're much closer to that space, but what's the verdict? What do you think people should think about differently going forward?
For me, I would say I've really come to realize the power of product development. I think this is a journey I've been on for the past year and a half or so as I've been developing FoodShake myself. But I think the example that we talked about, Galactica versus ChatGPT, the AI ethics piece aside, I am going to make a bet that had OpenAI released ChatGPT as just, say, GPT-4, there would not have been the same response. And the fact that they've been able to get it in front of everyone, not just people within the machine learning field, is incredible. And I think whoever's on their product team should be really commended for their insight there.
Yeah. So I would like to pour a little bit of water on all this, because, I feel that I might have been contributing to the hype. So I want to present something that ChatGPT is pretty bad at. So it still makes language model 101 errors. And one of the So whenever a new LM comes out, so I try to see what the failure modes are. So I asked ChatGPT, what is the smallest riding in Canada by area? And riding here means congressional district. So the correct answer is Toronto Centre, but ChatGPT said Nunavut, which is actually the largest. And the reason it says this is because the embedding for smallest is pretty similar to the embedding for largest, because the way the distributional hypothesis works, they appear in very similar contexts. The smallest riding is the largest riding is. However, in our human embedding space, if something like that exists, a human would never associate or never confuse smallest with largest ever. So this is a language model 101 mistake that it makes. And you can make it fail on the Vinograd schema if you just, rephrase it slightly differently. You can make it, make a lot of very simple common sense errors. So that's, a word of caution. It's pretty bad at actually answering things.
Definitely a fantastic technical progress and very, very interesting product choices that made it look much better than it is, and probably for many use cases it is much better than what it was before. But definitely a lot of shortcomings, definitely a lot of places that need improvement still. It is, the hype is the step function, but the progress is, incremental, and it definitely is in the right direction, but you're still going to be excited to see where we can go with newer models and newer technologies we're developing. But ultimately, what makes the biggest difference is what problem are you trying to solve with this, and what is the right setup and user experience for that problem to be solved, and what's the right system design really that you put in and around these kind of models to achieve the goals that you want. So thanks, both of you, for spending this hour with me. This was a fun conversation, as always. I will buy you a liquid drink whenever I see you, Suhas, just to tease you. But I might also take you to a restaurant with, completely new food. But yeah, I'm excited to see where we go from here. Thanks so much for listening to us, audience, and hope to see you very soon. We are going to publish another episode explicitly on the topics of ethical bias and legal issues around ChatGPT and using it going forward. So keep an eye out for that, and we'll see you soon.